Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mazen Al-Ghoul, and I would like to welcome you to the one-day conference, Big Data, Big Computing, and the Oil Industry, Opportunities for Lebanon and the Arab World. This event is jointly organized by the American University of Beirut and University College London. And before we start the welcoming address by our administration, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the full support of the Angela and Munib Masri Institute of Energy and Natural Resources. I would also like to thank the Lebanese Petroleum Administration for helping in the organization of the event. The first address is by Dr. Makram Swaidan, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture at AUB.
Thank you, Mazen. Before I start, I'd like, if you would join me in congratulating Provost Dalal. He was the 2013 recipient of the Kuwait Award. Until 2 days ago, I thought big data meant adding 3 numbers. I discovered it's a little bit more complicated. I'd like to, first of all, distinguished speakers, honored colleagues and students, welcome to the Big Data, Big Computing, and the Oil Industry Conference organized by the Munib and Angela Masri Institute of Energy and Natural Resources, the Computational Science Program at AUB, and the Center for Computational Science at University College London. This conference is also supported by the Lebanese Petroleum Administration. Same thing you said. Lebanon will experience an economic transformation as a result of the rapid growth of the oil and gas industry in the country. This poses major opportunities and challenges for educating, training, and skills development of the Lebanese population, as well as that of the wider region. The need for a workforce trained in modern methods of information technology, including many levels of computing expertise and the management and analysis of big data, are unquestionable. And the investment of international oil companies in this endeavor within Lebanon would therefore be entirely relevant to this at this time. Such investment necessitates a transformation of the educational curriculum to ensure that the workforce in the future is suitably educated and trained to exploit these scientific and technological developments. FEA at AUB is interested in creating relevant training and leading-edge research capabilities in diverse fields of technology, while fostering industrial and public sector engagement to inform our educational developments and resource allocation for research support in the target areas. FEA has introduced relevant educational programs in chemical engineering, industrial engineering, and petroleum engineering. Our undergraduate, graduate, and PhD engineering students have excellent computational and IT skills. FEA has 88 faculty members, full-time faculty members, who in the fall of this year are mentoring 2,172 undergraduate students, 300 master's students, and 60 PhD students. They all work together to contribute to advancement of knowledge in science and technology. In cooperation with the Masri Institute and the Lebanese Petroleum Administration team, the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture has formed research clusters in areas related to the gas and oil sector, including materials characterization, design of offshore structures, instrumentation control and wireless sensing, big data, modeling and simulation, project evaluation, risk assessment and worker productivity, and last but not least, remediation of oil spills. The 2 clusters that are relevant to today's meeting are big data and modeling and simulation. We are providing seed funding. The Masri Institute and FEA are together providing seed funding to research projects that follow these themes this coming year. Our faculty members are working on simulation of multi-fluid dispersed systems, reservoir modeling and production optimization for enhanced oil recovery, interfacial characteristics of dispersions, and modeling downstream processes using process simulators, developing distributed computer systems for accelerating the process of handling seismic data. I thought seismic data was earthquake engineering, but it's the discovery data. and drawing up conclusions as to where petroleum may be found. Other faculty members are doing research on machine learning and pattern recognition applied to the multi-dimensional and large data collected during seismic operations, and on developing an advanced analytics system for the Lebanese oil wells covering different aspects of automation, modeling, optimization, forecasting, faults modeling, and prediction, and yield analysis. Last, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference, the Masri Institute Steering Committee led by Dr. Nasreen Ghaddar, the Computational Science Program, and the University College London. I welcome again our speakers and panelists, and welcome our guests and participants. I hope that this meeting will lead to more opportunities to build on our local skills to build the big data future in serving Lebanon and the region. And last, it gives me great pleasure that FEA is hosting this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Swaidan. Our next address is by Dr. Patrick McGreevy, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at the UB.
Good morning. I want to add my word of welcome to Dean Swaidan's on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. It's really encouraging to see this collaboration between FAS, FEA, UCL, and representatives from industry, the Lebanese Petroleum Administration, and other groups. I think this is an important gathering, and it's the sort of thing that we should do more often. I have no doubt about the potential of big data and big computing to impact a host of domains in ways that we have only begun to imagine. I also have no doubt that oil and gas present a potentially transformative opportunity for Lebanon. We desperately need those new jobs for geologists, engineers, construction workers, and so many other people. And we need the training in computational methods that will develop people in this country. I'm happy that AUB, with its academic partner UCL, is hosting this conference because I think it's the role of universities to apply broad and deep critical thinking to all new opportunities, to weigh them. It's important that we don't limit our critical thinking to an exercise in instrumental reason, that is, to questions about means, how-to questions. We must also direct reason toward ends, why questions. At AUB, we've expressed this comprehensive approach through the creation of several new interfaculty programs: environmental studies, energy studies, and public policy and international affairs. We want students in these programs to learn skills, and in particular to learn to apply critical thinking, not only to how-to questions, but also to why questions, questions about ends. We want them to grasp the wider context and issues and to consider multiple points of view. Of course, it's entirely appropriate that this conference focuses on a how-to question. How can big data and big computing help Lebanon and other countries develop its fossil fuels in the most appropriate way? But even here at this conference, I think it's useful for someone to raise some broader questions. Frankly, there's a history in Lebanon of a relatively small elite group getting very rich while the vast majority struggle. Credit Suisse's annual ranking of wealth concentration lists Lebanon as having the third highest concentration of wealth of all the world's countries. Will the advent of oil and gas change that? Will Lebanon suddenly become like Norway and distribute the benefits of this new wealth among all of its citizens? Where will the money go? When we look at the example of other countries that have garnered energy windfalls, the results have not only been a concentration of wealth, but a concentration of political power. Will Lebanon somehow buck this trend and become more democratic because of gas and oil? Will oil and gas development make Lebanon less corrupt, more transparent? Will it impede the diversification of the Lebanese economy? Even Norway's economy has become less diverse because of oil and gas. Big data and big computing are exactly the sort of things that can help Lebanon move toward a more knowledge-based economy that focuses more on developing human resources than fossil fuel resources. The Gulf countries are pouring money into universities in hopes of doing exactly that. But can they really produce the necessary entrepreneurs and knowledge creators in an atmosphere of authoritarianism? Where wealth and power are so concentrated, how can you empower ordinary people? Finally, there's the question of the environment. The U.S. energy sector has not been able to prevent serious environmental damage. Will Lebanon somehow do much better? So in all of these areas, the concentration of wealth, economic diversity, democracy, transparency, human resource development, and the environment, I'm not sure Lebanon has a track record to inspire confidence in an ultimately positive outcome. There are many voices clamoring for exploitation of Lebanon's oil and gas resources. It's understandable, given the country's economic condition, that so many are eager to tap this source of wealth and to do it immediately. But we must at least ask the question, why? To what end? To what long-term result? I'm not naive. I know that oil and gas exploitation in Lebanon will go forward. There are too many needs and too much pressure for any other outcome. And as I said, this represents a tremendous opportunity, potentially transformative. But it will take truly extraordinary efforts to prevent the negative outcomes that I've described. So I'm hoping that the Masri Institute can convene an equally impressive group of actors in the near future to deal with these important questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Deep Magrivi. Our next address is by Provost Ahmed Dallal, Provost of AUB.
Good morning. The forum today brings to AUB distinguished academicians and senior leaders in high-tech IT-based applications in oil and gas industry from among local and Arab experts in big data and big computing, as well as, of course, international experts. AUB is committed to advancing computational science and engineering to fulfill a translational role in developing leading-edge research in the diverse fields of science and technology making. The computational capacity of the university is important for venturing into solving complex and advanced real-world research problems in the medical and energy fields, both of which are of central interest at an international level. The need for skilled IT experts in software and hardware worldwide is increasing at a very high rate, and AUB is considered as one of the institutions at the regional level that has the capacity to educate and train many of the most talented people in the Middle East. The university is taking steps to support the domains of high-performance computing, e-infrastructure, and big data analytics. One of the strategic academic initiatives at AUB for enabling world-leading research at the university is the establishment of the high-performance computing cluster. We have advertised the position to appoint an academic high-performance computing director for the cluster, and we already formed the high-performance computing committee to accelerate the use of the cluster that we have recently established. The faculty contributing to big data domains come from different home disciplines in computer science, chemistry, physics, electrical and computer engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and life and biomedical sciences, where the production, management, and analysis of big data is also increasingly a key challenge. We have faculty and students who do complex oil field simulations. Moreover, AUB has multiple operating systems for high-performance computation and several faculty members who do development and parallel computing. And while hardware investments typically need a total refresh every about 3 years, software can produce even bigger performance benefits and lasts at least 5 times this long. We are going to establish major partnership with University College London, the co-organizer of this event, to collaborate in these domains of high-performance computing, e-infrastructure, and big data analytics. Our institutions will be exploring and identifying the educational opportunities for students and trainees in computational science, information technologies, and other related fields. And we'll be seeking opportunities to collaborate in the offering of advanced training in software and hardware applications related to high computational computing to students and IT staff. In addition to supporting high-performance computing initiatives, we are also embarking on a university-wide digitization initiative, expanding digital resources to humanities and hopefully digitizing our precious collections in natural history and archaeology museums. We have also started exploring e-learning possibilities for teaching the larger community through online courses and degrees in high-demand areas, and one of the more recent ones is a diploma in pro-green diploma in green technologies. Such initiatives will require a great investment in our e-infrastructure and in advancing IT skills of our staff and students. Collaboration is vital to moving these and other IT initiatives forward, and this meeting and the very promising collaboration with UCL are important milestones that will help us realize our ambitious objectives. I thank the organizers of the conference, starting with the Masri Institute Steering Committee, the Computational Science Program, and of course our partners in University College London. I also would like to thank Deans Swaidan and Magrivi for their contribution and support of this initiative. And last but not least, I would like to thank Dr. Mazen Ghoul and Dr. Nisreen Ghaddar for working together on putting this conference, for their efforts. I actually witnessed these efforts firsthand on many occasions. I wish you a great conference, and I hope this will only be one step of many steps to come in the future.
Thank you, Provost Dalal. The last address is by the representative of the British ambassador, Mr. Nadeem Zaza.
Dear staff and students, members of the Petroleum Authority, wider energy sector, thank you all for organizing this conference. Thank you to the Masri Institute. It is great to see AUB and UCL teaming up on this. Big thank you for Dr. Kovni for inviting the British Embassy. Ambassador Fletcher regrets his forced absence. He would have really liked to be here to support an issue that is really close to his heart. I convey on his behalf the Embassy's full support to your efforts to introduce the right expertise needed for Lebanon to get this right and to make the best out of the potentially huge oil and gas finds off the coast and possibly onshore. It is important for Lebanon to use oil revenues in what serves the country best. This revenue, if well managed, presents incredible opportunities for Lebanon. For example, tackling the national debt and upgrading power, water, transport, and communications infrastructure. We all have a role to play, and you are certainly assuming yours today. Dean Magrivi, the ambassador, and the British Embassy cannot stress enough how much we share your concerns, and we hope that AUB plays a role in managing the oil and gas sector to help Lebanon avoid oil and gas becoming a curse. We are ready to offer our expertise and support. We are delighted that an excellent British company, Spectrum, was heavily involved in Lebanon's offshore and now onshore survey work. We are ready to offer our expertise and support whenever and wherever you may request to further build on our partnership with Lebanon. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best for today's conference.
Thank you, Mr. Zaza. Peter? Peter, talk to Rita. Are you going to use your laptop? All right. All right, so our first keynote speaker for today is Professor Peter Coveney. Peter Coveney is the director of the Center for Computational Science and Computational Life and Medical Sciences Network at the University College London. He holds a chair in physical chemistry and is an honorary professor of computer science and a member of the Center for Mathematics and Physics in the Life Sciences and Experimental Biology at UCL. He is well experienced in the oil and gas industry, having attained scientific and management positions in Schlumberger from 1991 to 1998. He is a founding member of the UK E-Infrastructure Leadership Council, a medical academy nominated expert on data, algorithms and modeling for the UK Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. And he is also professor adjunct within the Yale School of Medicine at Yale University. Peter is active in a broad area of interdisciplinary theoretical research, including condensed matter physics and chemistry, material science, life and medical sciences, and collaboration with clinicians. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Computational Sciences and has published more than 300 scientific papers, edited 20 books, and co-authored 2 best-selling popular science books, The Arrow of Time and Frontiers of Complexity with Roger Highfield. Peter, I'd like to welcome you.
I guess I can use this one. All right, well, let's leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction. Again, I want to underline my thanks for the organizers at the American University of Beirut for putting on this meeting. The date for this meeting was chosen not randomly, but because the previous 2 days have seen something called the Lebanese International Oil and Gas Summit, which was taking place in the Phoenicia Hotel just a few hundred meters up the road from here. That's all about 10th of January 2014, the date which still hasn't slipped, by means of which the big oil and gas companies will be making their bids for concessions offshore Lebanon. And the evidence is still growing that there's quite a lot to be had from that activity, and someone was hinting we've already now got seismic surveys of onshore Lebanon that look interesting. So the issue for those companies is real and present, and what they're worried about is slippage and continual uncertainty. But make no mistake, there is big and serious interest here. And the point about it is, of those people who know what the bidding process involves, it requires that up to 80% of the workforce who are involved in the oil and gas industry in Lebanon will be from the indigenous population. It expects those companies to invest substantial amounts of money in the country. And that's one of the motivations for this meeting, to try and bring minds together and understand what it takes to make an investment here that could be truly transformational. The transformation should and must not only be in the oil and gas sector, but that's plainly the driving force. So anyway, it falls to me to give an introduction to the day. I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's talks and the panel discussions, which I hope will bring to a conclusion where we hope we can go in this intersection between education, research, and, as it's commonly called today, innovation. That means something that's much more common, perhaps, in other countries than in Lebanon. The interaction, a direct interaction between the commercial sector and research. So that's the sort of thing that's at stake here, and big data and big computing are the means by which this will be brought about. So before going further here, I'll just give you a brief introduction to what I do. My agenda in the Center for Computational Science at UCL, I mean, the catchphrase for it is advancing science through computers. So that's pretty agnostic. We take on lots of things. Our interest is in exploiting all 3 elements of what I call E-infrastructure. That's certainly the plumbing, the hardware, the computers. We exploit the largest scale resources we can get our hands on, and I'm talking globally, not just in the UK. It's the software that you need to make those machines work and integrate. And most important of all, it's the people who are educated and trained and know how to use those things. And that's really the agenda for us here today. I'm trying to master this. So looking at what data does for us today, it's clear that data is accumulating at a frightening rate today. The resources that are being brought to bear to accumulate it are very widespread, and I'll talk a little bit about where they're coming from. It's by no means, of course, only the oil industry that's doing it. It's the need then to get that data accessible by people and experts who know what to do with it, because the data plainly contains the information and the secrets for which we can then exploit knowledge. And interoperability, which means we're no longer really in an era where people hold data to themselves. It's not necessarily in their interest to do so. My talk will just overview a number of areas, not only the oil service or oil field sector, where this is becoming increasingly important. In other words, we get far more than the sum of the parts if we're prepared to share data according to appropriate routes. And having integrated infrastructures that bring data and computing together. It's not unusual. It's certainly been a problem in the UK where divisions occur between expertise and domains. Some people think of themselves as data experts, and they think that all that matters is data. And then there's a group of people who only worry about high-performance computing, and somehow these things are different and require different skill sets. And nothing really could be further from the truth. As you can see on this slide, the type of projects that generate data are very widespread, and they require resources of a very large computational scale to analyze them. The examples that are being shown here include things like the Large Hadron Collider, which not too long ago led to the discovery of the Higgs boson and a Nobel Prize or two, through mining huge amounts of data from the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva. And then there are other projects that are going on today. One of them is called the Materials Genome Project. Rest assured, I'm going to say a bit more about the Human Genome Project in a minute, because that's going to transform medicine just as surely as data analysis will transform the oil industry and others. And so it's about sharing the data on not just a national but an international scale. So maybe we should put this thing up here. Connect me up. Where's the pointer on this?
This one.
So fundamentally in here, in addition to what I've been saying before, we're across the world, it's certainly not only true in Lebanon, that we're now suffering from a severe shortage of people with the skills and expertise to harness all of this stuff. Other people present today will, I'm sure, emphasize that, and I will say a few more things about that later. It connects the infrastructure to the software, the people who both write and use the software, and then you can become fraught with all these other aspects, particularly rife in the medical sector, but also clearly in other areas of commercial concern, data access, privacy. And this whole area that I'm hinting at of patient-specific medicine is going to depend on our ability to collect and analyze data. So to be clear, what I mean by big data, actually I pinched this from a very nice talk from the director of the Dutch eScience Centre. They've created such a centre in the last year or two. I spoke at their inaugural symposium in November, and they have a nice way of summarizing what big data is. It's about three types of things. It's not just large scale, because large is relative to the area you operate in. Certainly for us it can often be petabytes in my own area, but it could be the size of the data, but it's also typically the heterogeneity of it, many different types of data. The challenge is then simply data integration, being able to bring the data together and analyze it collectively, again, because the whole will be far greater than the sum of the parts. And then there's this other interesting component called here velocity. I'm thinking about the challenge of moving data around and the fact that the data may be changing in real time and how you cope with all of that. So this sort of nexus of big data is what the challenges are about here. So just a few examples of projects that are on the go, which would be called big data projects globally today. At least some of them are. This big project called Elixir is about genomic data across Europe. The scale at which that data is accumulating now is so vast that it's not possible to put all the genomic data in a single center anymore. We have a distributed European infrastructure. The center of it is actually at the European Bioinformatics Institute near Cambridge on the Human Genome Campus, but it's now a distributed infrastructure to manage this data. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that later, because this is transforming medicine. It's no longer just a life science activity. Recently, the EU has announced a Future Emerging Technologies project, one of the two large ones, called the Human Brain Project. It's funded at the level of €1 billion over 10 years to try and understand the brain on the level of a computational model, and the data that's related to that is also a challenge. We've got environmental science observatories, and then down here, one of the projects I'm involved in is a pan-European collaborative data infrastructure to allow researchers to share data across a number of different communities. One of those is biomedical, but we've got geoscience and others involved. Down here is something that's come out of the UK. It's just beginning off the back of very substantial investments by the UK government in this biomedical sector, actually to try and exploit the fact that the UK is one of the few countries that purports to have a national patient, if you like, healthcare data set. Much of it's unfortunately still on paper, but the idea is that we can integrate it and have it digitized and therefore accessible for research and, in the end, of course, the benefit of everyone in the medical domain. So to do this, you need e-infrastructure. So I'm hinting at that, and I'm going to come on to what's going on in the oil industry in a minute. But in the European domain, for example, we have infrastructure which has, again, historically been a bit fragmented. Some people investing in high-performance computers. There's a thing called PRACE that does that. Data has been looked at separately. I mentioned EU DAT. Then there's the cloud computing, which I think of as a third-party provision by commercial providers of data and compute capabilities, and you need the networking to move the data around. So once you start integrating all of this, you can become far more ambitious in terms of the things you can do. It's no longer a matter of firing off a query at a single database or ambitiously running a single simulation on no matter how big a computer. We want to tie all these resources together and start doing what we call workflows, where we move data and computing around to get more and more interesting results out. And in the end, these infrastructures have to respond to what users want, and users need to be in the driving seat. This hasn't always been the case historically. So just for a moment, take a look at what's going on at the high end of computing. I'm saying this, and I'm actually asking you to think, where is Lebanon in this space? I'm talking now at the outer reaches of high-performance computing. The exascale doesn't exist today. We expect it may be around, that's optimistic, around 2018. Actually, this date is beginning to recede a little as everyone understands the complexity of building such machines. An exascale machine will quite likely have hundreds of thousands of cores on it, even billions of them, and building such a machine in any effective way is a challenge. And beyond that, having software and the people who understand the architecture and the relationship between the software and the machine to run effective applications on it is a big challenge. And you know, the US has been allocating quite a lot of money into this, planning for applications that will be running there in a few years down the line. Make no mistake, the oil companies are interested in this space. I'm going backwards there, so I'm involved in a big project here which is planning for the development of software which will run on exascale machines. We have an idea of what their architectures are going to look like. We have to develop codes now that will then exploit them. So do you know of any codes yourself in Lebanon that will run on machines that have today, the largest ones may have hundreds of thousands of cores on them? Because this is the type of scale at the highest end which oil companies are interested in, we're interested in, other activities you're interested in, you will do faster, different, and better things on such resources than you can do on single core machines. How much teaching, training, and education do you have or give students here to understand these type of problems, to be at the forefront of scientific and engineering applications when these machines become available? So why would you do that for applications in science now? We're no longer talking about monolithic things. In a certain sense, that's kind of known and understood. We have applications that work at a given length or time scale in most parts of physics, chemistry, and even biology to some degree. But we know that our challenges are often across those scales. So if you take an example of water, a most mundane material, you might think, how you understand water depends on your background. If you're a chemist, you might be thinking of the electronic structure of water, and all you want to do is calculate, let's say, the electronic structure in terms of the quantum mechanical distribution of electrons around the nuclei. But again, you might be concerned with water in a biological sense, where the water is interacting with a protein. You're no longer bothering about the electrons. You're solving a problem that's more like that of Newtonian physics. In fact, that's classical molecular dynamics. But when you come onto larger scales, water is the subject and object of study by engineers, and they use the Navier-Stokes equations to study fluid dynamics, and most of those people never think for one moment about the atomic or molecular structure of water. But now we've gone beyond these monolithic areas where there was no interaction. We know of many types of problems. I only have to mention nanofluidics for you to recognize that. That's where you're understanding the flow of water and other systems through nanoscale devices. Then your flow problem is no longer just a computational problem in CFD. You have to worry about the molecular structure. And then you have to tie these domains together. So you really have to be able to connect domains together that historically have had very little to do with each other. This is a message of the importance of interdisciplinarity to be able to communicate with one another. So here's an example of things that I've been doing. Mazen mentioned I was once working in Schlumberger, and one of our areas of concern was drilling for oil, maybe offshore in Lebanon. You drill through a lot of clay materials, and those clay materials present problems to the drilling process because in contact with water-based fluids, we use water because of environmental constraints, clays swell. And the clays then break up, and while you're drilling the well could disintegrate, and you could have a black up the pipe, which could be catastrophic. So there's a big industry or sub-industry within the oil industry designing additives to stop clays swelling. And the impact of the swelling process at this molecular level with a representation of the clay sheets on the macroscopic properties of the wellbore is an illustration of a multi-scale type of problem where you need to be connecting things across scales. So each of these little turquoise blobs is a historically individual area of activity. Today we need to worry about connecting them together, and in order to do that computationally we're faced with massive challenges with the infrastructure, but these are to address real world problems. We have to distribute applications and codes on different machines, store data in different places, and run a huge number of simulations in complicated sequences of workflows. The challenge here is getting hold of the people with the understanding of the infrastructure and the software to develop those type of applications. I don't have time to worry about that, but this is a picture of typically what people have available to them on their desktop. If they work with me in the Center for Computational Science, we have developed single uniform interfaces to each and every resource we have access to. So you will see a supercomputer on your workstation in exactly the same way as you could see your desktop, or you could be running your applications from a handheld device. This conceals an awful lot of complexity and a huge amount of power. These are the largest supercomputers available in Europe. This is Exceed, the equivalent infrastructure funded by the NSF in the US, regional and national facilities in the UK, and your own local resources, all connected in a uniform way. So then we have the data challenge, and this project UDAT I mentioned describes a whole lot of data storage facilities around Europe. These are located close to high-performance computing centers for the very reason that the data that you generate in these machines is very large and needs to be held close to the machines. So we need an infrastructure and a staging capability to take data on and off the machines. But you could be at an arbitrary point with respect to those and still performing these type of applications. So I'll come to the oil industry in a minute, but I'm trying to keep this discussion quite general. What's going on in the area of data, big data for healthcare? Remember what I said about the UK and its National Health Service. There's a huge amount of data lying around in hospitals, and the initiative is now on to get control of that in a sensible way to improve healthcare outcomes. In the UK, in the last year, or perhaps two now, £90 million of funding has come from the Medical Research Council to set up something called the FAR Institute of Health Informatics. And actually in July of this very year, David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, announced his own personal initiative, he called it, and put £100 million, this is completely separate, into something called the 100,000 Genomes Project. This is the largest genome sequencing project in the world, and it's run out of a new company wholly owned by the National Health Service called Genomics England. And the agenda there is to plan for large-scale DNA sequencing to be incorporated into the NHS. Because people believe that if we know your genome sequence, we will be able to say a lot about your health and problems and how to diagnose those treatments. But in order to be able to get to that stage, you have to wrestle with all the data, the genome sequencing. Maybe you're aware that today it takes no more than 3 minutes to perform a whole human genome sequence. But then you become overwhelmed by the quantities of data generated, which you have to process in order to produce a meaningful genomic analysis. In order to do that, we're running from a standing start. The Medical Research Council is an illustrious one, has funded work that's led to many Nobel Prizes, but has no tradition whatsoever in computational science and informatics. It's now on a rush to bring people in. So it's vaguely similar to what I'm thinking about here. How do you build knowledge and expertise in an area where you've got nothing? You have to develop computational science and informatics capabilities to deal with management and analysis of data in an area you have very little experience of in order to achieve these political goals. So the challenge ultimately is an example of large-scale data integration. Here, I want data from the omics level, from the genome level, right up to the clinical data on each and every patient, individualized, so that, and it will include very heterogeneous information at the organ level. I'll typically have imaging data as well. I need to be able to build data infrastructures that capture all of this stuff in a secure and confidential way, because this is personal data. And then I have to have the people with the knowledge to understand how to run, in the first instance, data analytics on this stuff. Because what we're trying to do is see if the population can be stratified. The days of blockbuster drugs are gone. The pharmaceutical industry is no longer expecting to produce one-size-fits-all products. We are going to be looking at an era where the companies have to develop more like niche busters, drugs that work for subsets of the population and not for others. And they will work on the basis of things like the genome imprint, so to speak, of the cluster which has been stratified. So let's now finally look at a few things going on in the oil and gas industry. See, in the UK, I'll say a few things in a minute about what the government's trying to do to incentivize industry to take note of e-infrastructure, but the oil and gas industry has been generating enough wealth for itself and understands the importance of technology that many of the big companies actually own very large supercomputers already. And look at this, this is a statement from BP in the last year or so. They claim to have the world's largest supercomputer for commercial research. It's sitting in Houston now. It's a 2.2 petaflops machine, and that's the equivalent of, let's say, 100,000 average PCs. And they have, that's what you would call a petabyte of RAM memory and 23.5 petabytes of disk storage. And it's used for processing all their geophysical data. So this is a company that's already interested in investing at that scale. And what I'm trying to say to you is, if you want to play this game or want to be recruited into a company that does that sort of stuff, you have to understand what it takes to do large-scale computing and run big activities and analyze data at scale. How much does Lebanon have of that expertise in situ today? I think not much. And then big data, look at what Shell is doing, one of the other big companies interested perhaps in oil and gas exploration in Lebanon. They're into data analysis in a major way. You can see some of the quotes here from Ian Dorland, who's the Executive Vice President at Shell for IT and technical innovation. And they are spending an average of £650 million a year compiling data to analyze large numbers of sites. Fundamentally, it's about data acquisition in the context of seismic surveying, and it can be about reservoir modeling and simulation to optimize the location and then the production of the reservoir that you're then looking at. Now, I'm just going to say a couple of words because we've got a distinguished speaker from McKinsey who will be talking a little later, but their own influence on the commercial sector is well known, and I'm quoting here from one of their reports from 2011, Big Data, the Next Frontier for Innovation, Competition and Productivity. You only have to look at a few of the claims that are made there to realize that this is a very serious thing for companies worldwide. I mean, just take a look at some of the assertions that in the USA alone, within the next 5 years, of the order of 150,000 more deep analytical talent positions are required, and 1.5 million more data-savvy managers are required to take advantage of the opportunities that are presenting themselves in big data. This is just in the USA alone in its current position. If that's the case there, what's the situation like? What are the opportunities waiting for us here in Lebanon? Look at the UK. I've been involved in working with the Council for Science and Technology. We've been advising the Prime Minister himself on what needs to be done there. And some of the recommendations are, again, about the role of research and education and how it can contribute to economic growth. The emphasis on the age of algorithms, the understanding of how to turn data into knowledge, and particularly one of the things is to develop a center, we call it a translational center, that could involve pure basic science and algorithms translating into industrial applications all in one single national enterprise. This is the Science Minister, David Willits, at the UK, and he's been persuaded, particularly by a few academics and other industrialists, of the importance of the UK investing in this space. Around £350 million of UK government money has gone into e-infrastructure and big data in the last 2 years. And this is seen by the government as an essential element in underpinning what we now call the knowledge economy. We've had problems since 2008 with the collapse of what was market capitalism at the time, and the UK has needed to rebalance its economy so that it's no longer so dependent on financial services. This government sees this new IT-driven economy as the way to go. So we're now working with David Willits on trying to develop software and data on-ramp centers. An on-ramp center means educating and teaching not in universities now, but in the commercial sector itself. There are many companies that don't even recognize the opportunities they have to exploit the technology that could give their own industry a big push forward. So there's a lot of investment that's being planned for those, which involves really a nexus, again, between the expertise that's in academia and teaching and training direct into industry. Again, there's an information economy strategy. I won't dwell on that for too long, but it's driven by David Willits and Ed Vasey, who's the Minister for Culture, Communications and Creative Industries. And again, it's trying to support enterprises and government services and in the use of digital infrastructure for data-driven activities. How are we doing for time? You haven't said anything to me about how are we doing for time? Okay, so all of that is the background. There's big initiatives internationally, nationally, and then there's the local thing at UCL, for instance. UCL sees itself as a big international university. It has an international strategy. That's one of the reasons why I'm here today. It's got a presence elsewhere in the Arab world already, and it's concerned with ever drawing ever closer its interactions between the academic domain and industry, who have a lot of major partners already who work and collaborate with us on developments of new commercial enterprises. And as is quoted by UCL's counsel here, from them, UCL is committed to becoming a global leader in enterprise and innovation, supporting and promoting effective knowledge exchange, entrepreneurship, and so on. This is one little thing I should mention because it's a direct consequence of all the things that are going on. A lot of funding that's thrown around in the UK and the investments that are coming with it. This is a company that, in fact, I've been involved in creating with a colleague who's sitting here with me, a former member of the American University of Beirut, Dr. Riyam Kanso, and another colleague who's formerly from a leading engineering consultancy elsewhere in the UK, developing a new consultancy company that can provide these kind of high-end and technical services to a whole range of domains where big data and big computing are important. This is by no means clearly limited to oil and gas. But the message here is there's a huge amount of generic knowledge and capabilities that are available for understanding and exploitation. So what's going to go on in the region in Lebanon? I think we've seen enough from what was said in the introductions and things I've been saying that there's a real need for skilled IT experts in software and hardware. And one of the arguments that the politicians find rather compelling is if you can do this right in a modern knowledge economy, you could be gaining growth between 2 to 3% of GDP per annum. That means in the UK around £60 billion per annum would be added through these kind of investments. The investments of a few £100 million from the government, they would like to think deliver that kind of growth in GDP. So this, you would conclude, should be particularly relevant to the emerging oil and gas industry opportunities in Lebanon. And let's just see what we have to say there. AUB is particularly interesting to us because it's clearly not just nationally a leading institution, but across the region. It has the capacity to educate and train talented people in these new areas of big data and computational science. And again, with UCL, with its interest in creating such sort of innovative endeavors, a link here potentially combined with these inward investments that perhaps the oil and gas companies are prepared to make, could set up something very important. I'm stressing here the interest is not just in traditional research and education, it's the I that comes with it, Centers for Research, Education and Innovation. The innovation is about what impact this investment has on your economy, on your region, not just a traditional limited academic thing. So that's why we're interested in this area in further partnerships as well. And the summary here is clear. Big data and big computing is now becoming completely central to all fields of science and engineering and medicine, and was hinted earlier by Ahmed Dalal, into the arts and humanities as well. So there's a massive demand. I'm sure colleagues from McKinsey's and elsewhere will tell us that. Out there in industry, they simply cannot get enough people who have the skills to do what they require to drive their companies forward. So what we're looking to do is fill that gap in this kind of way. And it is timely, therefore, that Lebanon should invest in this area, and the investment we would like to think could come from imaginative use of those funds from oil and gas companies. This is my last slide. It just lists a whole bunch of people and some of the funding and projects that we've had that I've used and drawn on in my presentation. With that, though, I will stop and thank you for your attention.
We can take questions now.
Nazarene has one.
No, I'm just wondering if you have that network in Europe, cloud computing, putting together all.
Have we got a microphone, I think?
I mean, you are consolidating in Europe all the different centers of high-performance computing and to come up with the handling of the big data and do all these initiatives. What do you think in the Arab region, we can do, because my understanding is that you are highly engaged with the Qatar initiative on high computing, and there could be a role for AUB to play. And if you can elaborate on this, because given the current resources of AUB, even the high computing cluster that is under development will never reach to what we've seen here. Like right now, it is probably 256 core, and it may reach 500, but I don't know in how much time. Mazen would know.
Sure. I wanted to say something. You know, I've been associated with AUB, as some of the people here know, for quite a while, and we take students, very good students, sometimes for summer placements. That's why we take them, because they're good. But I notice that they're training, and they're not exposed to some of the leading edge things. Parallel computing, which is an important component, is something that's barely touched on. So it's, if you're not exposed to the challenges of knowing how to write parallel, program a parallel computer, then you are in a bit of a spot of bother. You don't understand the transformation in the science you can do when you get hold of very big machines. As soon as you get onto a machine which has a few thousand cores today, well, then you begin to, and you understand how to use it properly, you begin to want something bigger, so you'll be driven by the science case. However, these are expensive investments, make no mistake. So coming back to the investments that could be made in Lebanon, for one thing, we'd be looking for some of these companies to do some serious investment in this space, but the wider thing of oil and gas, yes, UCL's other major footprint right now in the Arab world is in Qatar. They do have a major strategy for high-performance computing, big data. That's been developed under the new president of R&D there, called Thomas Zakaria, who used to be at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So we know they're expecting to have a petascale machine in 2014, and if he's still in place when the exascale machines come in, he wants to see Qatar having one of the first. So there's an agenda that he has. He's also trying very ambitiously to grow the numbers of people and experts locally. We know, you know better than I do, he's going to have problems with the expertise question, which is what this whole discussion is about fundamentally. You can have very expensive kit, but if you don't know how to use it, it's a huge waste of time. So education and training is central. I'm saying you in this country have the people and the skill base to grow that. You have the people who could populate his computers elsewhere. So UCL, AUB, Qatar could be a very interesting development. Right now, Qatar Foundation is trying to build PhD programs in Qatar. We're talking to them about what those mean. They mean some level of partnership with external entities. But certainly people from Lebanon could be very active in that space. But they have to know and understand how to utilize this type of infrastructure to crack really big problems in the oil industry and beyond.
You mentioned big data in several areas. What are you doing to leverage this data into decision making? Collect data to make better decisions. And I think that's talking about analytics, which is being So what level of analytics are you using?
Does he need?
There is basically, I know, descriptive, which is basic statistics. You have predictive, and then you have prescriptive, which use optimization. At what level of analytics at UCL are you in your analytics work?
Okay, that's a good question. And first of all, we need the data to do anything at all. In the medical domain, for instance, which is building on biology, and you know from this cascade of science, theory, algorithms, predictive modeling has taken place over decades, if not more than a century, from physics, because we have mathematical descriptions. We can write quite elaborate models and believe they're true. We can run simulations which are quite faithful for an individual case. The biological scenario is not that. Today you can't really publish a paper in a leading biological journal if it's not led by experiment. So your theory or modeling is always added on. And then the medical case, a fortiori, because medicine is even less engaged with modeling and simulation. So the game for those people in the medical space I was talking about is getting hold of medical data, genome sequencing, image data, electronic health records, histopathology, anything that the medics collect, digitizing it and putting it into some database. Then we run what you might call this analytic stuff. What I mean by that, in my jargon, is Baconian science. It's statistical, machine learning, inference-based. I've got a lot of previous examples. I learn from them. So when I come to a new case, I can predict off the back of that. That's pretty powerful, but it only goes so far. The reason being obvious. In the medical instance, I mentioned stratification. That's clustering for you and me. It might be some clustering algorithm which indicates which people will respond to a given drug and which will have adverse consequences. So that's pure statistics. There's no knowledge actually or understanding in it, but it starts making you ask questions. The step forward beyond that is doing predictive modeling, starting to come on to writing mathematical equations, having mechanistic descriptions, and that starts to require even more high fidelity, three-dimensional simulation. And that's the sort of thing, so I do some of that in blood flow in the brain. Actually, it came out of oil industry, studies of oil and water in sandstones and carbonate rocks. We take image data of the rock and we run the fluid flow simulator through it. Now I capture image data from CT scans or MRI. I reconstruct an image of the patient-specific vasculature and I run a blood flow simulation through it. I want to run that fast enough that I can tell a clinician before he carries out an invasive operation, what's the best thing to do to support the clinical decision. That's the kind of apotheosis, because that's where we're really looking at a personalized thing. We're no longer doing statistics. It's all personalized. There's a huge program there, and I'm jumping right across it because verification and validation, especially for safety critical activities, things where you're taking decisions on people's lives, it really matters that you get it right. But that's what the agenda is. Does that answer the question?
Just a remark, and I would like to ask you, the initiative here is being between computing and engineering. And I question whether there any role for business to advance this particular area. You mentioned medicine, which is application domain. But I would like to see what's the role of business in addressing risk, showing value, market value, and other things.
Well, I actually, just in my own case, I mentioned this little spin out. It's a business operation called CBK Sycon. It's seeing commercial opportunities. That's all part of what I'm talking about. The innovation, research, education, innovation is about bringing the business opportunities into the space because they can drive the science as well. I've been involved in both sectors in my life. You might think science is very different from industry, but actually industry often has very big, fundamental, challenging scientific engineering problems that need highly smart and intelligent people to crack them. They can lead to fundamental breakthroughs as well. So it's just a sort of virtuous cycle. So the answer must be they should be part of this.
If there are no more questions, I would like to thank Peter for his talk. Thank you very much. So our next speaker, keynote speaker for today, is Dr. Stefano Martinotti. Stefano Martinotti is a partner with McKinsey & Company, leading the Middle East Business Technology Office, where he led more than 12 IT technology strategy planning exercises and defined the standard IT strategy methodology with McKinsey used across multiple global situations. He also managed numerous large IT transformations and assisted in efforts to maximize utilization of IT investments and applications. He runs the Lean IT service line in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and numerous knowledge initiatives in innovative IT trends in a number of industries, including financial services, oil, and gas. He has worked across the broad spectrum of sectors on issues related to all aspects of the IT functions, including strategy, diagnostics, and performance management. He leads the business technology, oil, and gas practice, and is one of the founders and leader of the BTO Lean IT service line, focusing on innovative and high-performance IT. He led more than 15 large-scale IT transformation efforts coached senior business IT executives on maximizing alignment and improving dialogues, and supported over 10 capability building efforts. Dr. Martinotti has obtained a MS in computer science engineering from Bologna University and an MBA from Cambridge University, where he was awarded with the John Bolton FME Prize for the best student of the year. Stefano, please let's welcome Dr. Stefano.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How are you? Are you here? Good. I have the unfair challenge of speaking after such a distinguished speaker as Professor Kovney, yet here I am. Thanks for the generous introduction. My name is Stefano. Accent and name between I'm Italian. I'm based in Abu Dhabi. And I'm based in Abu Dhabi because the key focus of my client service is in oil and gas and how to further the adoption of technology in oil and gas. So what I'm going to share with you today is the result of work that we have done, we are doing, we're planning to do with the national oil companies in the Gulf and with some of the super majors. Now, one note when we speak about technology in oil and gas, that's a bit of an interesting story because this is sorry, I need to go back. Okay, this is an industry that in a sense was very advanced technology, invented big data 30 years ago, then it forgot to invent big data and completely lost it. And for a couple of decades, going to talk to business executives, to board members of large oil and gas company about technology was a very sobering experience because they didn't care as much as their peers in financial services and technology. Now, since 5 to 10 years, this has dramatically changed. And Professor Kovney shared some of the amazing work that BP and Shell are doing, but these are two of many examples of how now oil and gas is catching up and catching up very fast. Let me bore you for a second with one definition, simply because when you leave the world of advanced academics and you go to the boardrooms and so on, even getting agreement on what is the definition, what is automation, what can technology do for your industry is not so obvious. Now, automation across sectors, but especially in oil and gas, is like a biphase Janus. It has two phases. One is about the business process automation, if you want. Invest in technology to lower labor intensivity of certain processes. Very important in an industry like oil and gas, where a lot of the tasks are dangerous, a lot of the tasks are environmentally sensitive. The other one, which for me is honestly the most exciting and relates more closely to today's theme, is about the data analytics. It's about collecting vast amount of data and extract insights from them. Now, on the first part, on the business process automation, oil and gas industry is doing okay. On the data and insights, as I was saying, it has fallen behind a bit, and now it's trying to catch up, and catch up very fast. Oops, I'll get this right sooner or later. Now, just a double click to make this a bit more concrete. On the information and analysis part, some of the main categories, if you want, of investments from the companies is about tracking behavior of individuals, be them operator in upstream or midstream, be them customer in downstream. Let's not forget that a lot of those companies have vast networks of shops. Think of Shell, Total, and so on, and all the network of petrol station, due to which they do significant work in retail. But it's also tracking of behavior of objects, if you want, of things, like, for instance, the refinery mix. Which crude or which mix of crudes do you send from the production site to the refineries? That makes a hell of a lot of a difference to the P&L of companies at the end of the year. Enhanced situational awareness. This is something that on health and safety is massive, but also on preventive maintenance is massive, as well as the sensor-driven decision analytics, which is something that in Lebanon you have experienced in recent months, and your experience coming forward when it comes to exploration of offshore and onshore potential site actually for production. The automation of control, I'll dwell a bit less. I want to save a bit more time for the following charts, because this is the bit more traditional process automation, which is common to a number of sectors and industries, if you want. It's taking a process, make it less human intensive. Voilà. Where does all this apply in oil and gas?
I wouldn't be a consultant if I didn't use a value chain. So here is our beautiful oil and gas value chain. It's very obvious at a glance that the impact of technology is important across, but is very much concentrated in upstream and a bit in downstream. This is all the work, for instance, when we speak about the big investment that we saw in the previous presentation from Shell and BP, this is some of the main focus, the seismic analysis, reservoir modeling, drilling and production optimization. This is where companies 5 years ago realized it was important. They started massive investment. They started collaboration with universities. And this is where now, especially the super major, are fairly advanced. This reliability and preventive maintenance is what they're realizing now. We see later an exhibit. This, guys, is big money. Being a practitioner, let me take this very managerial view on the problem. For a platform that can produce 50,000 barrels per day, an offshore platform, increasing by 10% your effectiveness in preventive maintenance means $250 million per annum. It's a lot of money. If you think of how many offshore platform does a super major manage, you can easily make the math. Then this is a bit where the very latest frontier of technology and even big data, if you wish, apply to the industry. So, okay, the supply chain optimization, nothing particularly exciting from my viewpoint there. Capital productivity, very, very exciting. This is an industry which is massive capital intensive. In whatever you do across the value chain, you need to invest and commit a lot of money. This is all the debate about the exploration in Lebanon. We have identified reservoirs offshore, onshore, etc. This seems to be very sizable. Who will commit the money, when, which analysis do we need to do before we decide how to commit them? Oops. I think I've done something wrong here. Can I get help from a technology expert who cannot handle a laptop? Fantastic. Let me go on anyway without charts till the time we get the presentation back up. Fantastic, great. I'm not going to touch this anymore. I don't know what I've done. Thank you very much. Very good. So what is the stance of the companies toward those opportunities? And there was a question earlier on this. They went from the purely reactive mode of saying we need to install some degree of automation to the proactive mode of saying we need to do some monitoring to now go full in predictive mode. Because this is certainly the most economical efficient way to leverage technology for such a capital-intensive industry. To give you some concrete example, big investment on the seismic area and on exploration, where you have a set of sensors on seabed, for instance, for offshore exploration, that allow you to produce accurate 4D pictures at different intervals on time. It's typically fortnightly or monthly. Actually, that allows you to see through the hydrocarbon formation. This is massively important, again, in exploration, because if you go, you try to exploit a site and then you got the estimation grossly wrong, that's going to hit you majorly. Smart wells, this is where the Internet of Things come into place. We will see later a quote from some technology provider how increasingly there is a trend toward building wells with components that automatically talk to each other, and the fact the well auto-drills and auto-operate itself, which is also environmentally significantly more safe if you think of some of the big accident in the deep sea water exploration in the Gulf of a few years ago. Process automation, one more. Asset integrity, great investment here. This is where big data has a huge impact. Algorithms that detect deviation of behavior of equipment when it's still somehow functioning, but it starts deviating a bit from the norm, in a sense, because that is a powerful predictor that that piece of equipment might actually break or might stop functioning properly. As well as also sensor for vibration that pretty much accomplish the same accomplish pretty much the same, pretty much accomplish the same mission. And again, preventive maintenance is a big deal in this industry. And all the man-machine interface, because this is an industry where you have control tower in computational centers, the big BP computational center that we spoke about earlier, but you have a lot of operators on the ground. So you need to equip this operator with actually applications which are light enough to be portable, but they're insightful enough to be helpful in their work. A couple of quotes on a couple of trends. I spoke earlier about the self-drilling well and actually the usage of equipment that through RFID and the Internet of Things start interoperate with each other. Big deal, and I was massively skeptical, and still massively skeptical, but facts have proven me wrong, about the importance of semantics in engineering document, especially for the capital productivity stage. Another trend I became aware a couple of days ago, so it's not reflected on the charts, but I think it's actually pretty cool. There's one large operator in the Northern Sea which is investing massively in improving the maintenance of offshore platform through 3D printing. So whenever they become aware that a given piece or a given component is about to break up, they don't ship the component anymore, they don't store it on the platform anymore, they print it on the platform, which I think is actually something very interesting as a trend. And they are doing that, they're experimenting that on a couple of platforms. The experiments seem to be going well, then they want to propagate it across. Once again, to operate all of this in an effective manner, you need to amass vast amount of data, you need to be able to analyze them. So this makes, I believe and I hope, fairly concrete what big data means for this industry. Does it matter? Should the CEO of one of these companies matter? Pay attention, if you want, to these trends. Yes, she or he should. If you see what it would mean to increase the asset efficiency, which is all we talked about at the end, is asset efficiency, from an average to high to a top quartile value, both if you take a benchmark on the North Sea UK offshore or Gulf of Mexico deep water, just for the sake of using two of the data sets, which are more complete and more accurate, that might result in annual cash flow lost or gained, depending how you look at that, of about 1 billion US. So once again, you're speaking about massive amount of investments. A couple of words on big data. We had a wonderful presentation about what big data is, how it's carried out, etc. So we not even try to together. You've done a fantastic job. Just a couple of points of view from a managerial viewpoint, which is how I rationalize my contribution to today's discussion can be. You do not need, from a corporate point of view, to have the most perfect and most complete set of data before you start using big data. Especially in certain areas of your operation, you already have data which are vast enough, varied enough, and accurate enough to let you make interesting decisions and important decisions. A lot of companies believe that, especially in the Gulf, a lot of the national oil companies are investing incredibly to get the total super duper set of data because they believe that that is a key prerequisite to extract any value. This is not accurate. And BP, Shell, Total, Statoil have shown how you can pioneer actually this area just using a subset of the data. The second point is in data analytics, the first step and the most important step in reality requires, and here I link back to the skill shortage, requires human judgment, requires distinguishing what are the data that matter and what are the data that don't matter. Machines and cognitive algorithm can help you, but they don't substitute people. And here we go back to the point that the skill shortage in this area is not serious, it's dramatic. There are by far not enough people with the right degrees, with the right talent, with the right studies that enter the workforce across the sector worldwide, let alone in oil and gas. Oil and gas was considered to be if you allow me, a cool industry 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and this is where a lot of talents entered the industry. This was around the baby boomer generation. Now that generation is retiring, and the new generation looks significantly more at the 2.0, 3.0 companies as being the cool places to be. And they're not wrong, but this industry has a massive need of talent, which also links back to the question for Lebanon. If you are, as most likely you will, develop a significant presence in the oil and gas, what does it mean for the provision of talent to that industry? Whoa, I got it right for once. Great. This is a bit of an articulation, well leveled down, of what I was saying earlier. If you see just diminishing from just improving the efficiency, so just diminishing by the few percentage point the unplanned downtime, which is really what impacts the productivity of those assets, can have for one single platform a massive impact. What's interesting in those platforms, all the chain that you see over there, I'll dare to touch it, hoping I don't put the thing in sleeping mode again. All this chain here was typically, and is typically still carried out by operators on the platform. However, more and more, we see that through data linkages, through big data centers, the control rooms of those platforms are actually moved onshore. One of the super major, I will not quote for confidentiality, but it's easy to guess which one it is has actually built a huge control room in Houston that actually uses the data which are amassed in Houston to control a lot of the offshore platforms. Okay, very good. And now, closing with a bit of a sobering note, looking at this massive economic potential, looking at the advanced in theory and abilities in this field, the reality on the ground is very sobering. So what's preventing a lot of the companies to extract the full value today? And here again, has a lot to do with the lack of qualified people that can support the improvement of those processes, are very sobering, very menial things, very mundane things, right? Data integrity is not maintained. The data is not stored, is not accessible, simply is not analyzed. Because yes, the machine analyzes it, but you don't have enough operator to devise the algorithm. It's not communicated. It's not used in decision making. So I guess the closing message here is this is an industry that has lost a lot of ground in the usage of technology, has now realized it. They're now catching up massively. And they're catching up honestly at breathtaking speed because they're pouring a lot of money, hundreds of millions of US. The oil companies in the Gulf are actually leading the charge there. Both through traditional automation and through big data, we will see a lot of improvement in the P&L of this company, and this will become a strategic differentiator. The company that will use big data and technology more strategically will actually outpace the others. The big, and this is a common theme from the McKinsey Global Institute, is not only about oil and gas, the big worry that we have as an institution vis-a-vis this sector, vis-a-vis this trend that was mentioned, but vis-a-vis the economy in general, the world economy in general across, is the skill shortage. Universities simply don't produce enough engineers. They simply don't produce enough IT professionals. They simply don't produce enough qualified people to work in those fields. I close on this remark. I was, I think, kind of on time, which for an Italian is an accomplishment. I welcome questions if you have any. We save them for the panel. Sir.
Can you comment on the difference between data and
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree, and I think Professor Coveney also discussed this earlier. One thing is, and I think this chart actually speaks very well to your question in a sense, no? One thing is having the data, and part of the problem that companies have, the data are not maintained or they're not stored, so they need to acquire them. Without that, as Professor Coveney said, you're not even in the game. There's not even point discussing. Now, the point is that is a necessary condition, but large and non-sufficient condition, because if you don't, let's say the problem of gathering data covers those three steps in a sense. But from the analyzing the data upward, this is what converts into data. And this, I'm glad you're asking the question, goes back to our view on the big data, that this is a very powerful trend. This is a very powerful trend, but it does rely at the end of human judgment, and it does not need to be 100% exhaustive in the set of data that you have across the value chain to extract value. So in a sense, gathering data is necessary, is not sufficient. To generate value, you need decision making on those data. Any more questions? Thanks for your attention.